Are we at the start of another round in the very public falling out between U.S. President Donald Trump and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz? The German leader made headlines today saying he wouldn't advise his own children to study or work in the United States right now. But before we look at that and at a phone call between Merz and Trump, here's a quick recap of what's happened so far. The Trump-Merz relationship hit rock bottom after Merz accused Trump of having no strategy in the Iran war, and that his entire nation was being humiliated by Tehran. Trump fired back, saying Merz had no idea what he was talking about, and that it was no wonder Germany was doing so poorly. Well, today, Merz spoke out again at a gathering of young Catholics here in Germany. Have a listen.
I am a great admirer of America, but my admiration is not growing at the moment. So, I would not advise my own children to go to the US at the moment to study or to work, simply because of the social climate that has suddenly developed there. And, incidentally, even quite recently, the opportunities for highly educated people in America used to be very different than they are today. Now, even the best educated people in America have great difficulty finding a job.
Let's take a closer look at this and bring in Jan Techau. He's the Europe Director for the political risk consultancy Eurasia Group. Welcome, Jan. Now, Merz and Trump spoke on the phone today, and I do want to get to that in a second. But first, why is the Chancellor making a public statement like the one we just heard when there is already so much bad blood between him and Trump?
I think there are a couple of reasons at play here. First of all, Merz has a propensity to do these things, to ad-lib, to improvise, especially in surroundings where he feels comfortable. And then these things just come out of him. He's not weighing his words, then he's not speaking tactically. And from a diplomatic standpoint, that's not always a fortunate thing that he can do. It sounds perhaps, quite authentic, but it's not in diplomatic terms the best thing to do. Secondly, I think the Europeans, including Merz, have also learned that, confronting Trump, is no longer, as bad a thing as it once was. Trump has tuckered, has chickened out on a few things, has never really pulled through on many of his threats. And it's like cry wolf. You issue these warnings and denigrate your opposites once too many, and then the effect wears off. And then thirdly, I think also what's really important is it's great for domestic consumption. Most of the audiences back home, eat this stuff up. Merz finds words for a sentiment that most of the Germans also have about the US at the moment. So I think there's a mix of factors at play when he says these kinds of things.
I want to zoom in on one aspect that you raised there. He says this when he feels comfortable, and it is kind of striking that the messaging is so different from when he takes the big stage to when he talks to school children. Why is that? And why is there no consistency, seemingly, between what he is willing to say when he is at an official function to what he does when he is in an environment where he feels at ease? He must be aware of the fact that this still gets out and becomes known and is reported on.
Yeah, but there's this tendency in him to speak like this, stuff then comes out of him. This is really, we've seen this also in the domestic context quite often, where he's, produced these kinds of gaffes, has produced ammunition that his opponents will then use. He is, if you want to turn it positively, he is not, completely in message control at all times. And we often hate this about politicians when they do these stilted kind of statements, stuff that's pre-scripted. But then again, when you just improvise a bit too much and you speak from the heart at all times, that can be quite damaging as well. So I think Merz, has not really found the middle way for himself on this. He's the chancellor now. He can't speak like an opposition leader or, someone basically, in a circle of friends. It's just something that he, I think, needs to get under control a little more in order to avoid these kinds of diplomatic damages.
Diplomatic damage, you say? How do you expect, if at all, Donald Trump to respond to this?
Trump usually uses these kinds of opportunities. He's amassing political capital by making use of the gaffes of his opponent. He's also feeding, red meat to his own constituencies by lambasting the people that have said, negative things about him. I'm pretty sure that Donald Trump will come up with something and retort to this. I think that's in the making. The big issue is now not to focus on that too much. You have enough homework to do, for German foreign policy and domestic policy. Just don't just focus on Trump and how he might react. And so therefore, I think, regardless of what Trump says now, it shouldn't be like a massive affair, and it shouldn't, distract you from really the main priorities that you have at home.
Mm-hmm. All of this is happening on a day when Donald Trump and Friedrich Merz spoke on the phone for the first time in a while. And I want to read out what the German Chancellor posted about it on X. He wrote, "I had a good phone call with Donald Trump on his way back from China. We agree. Iran must come to the negotiating table now. It must open the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran must not be allowed to have nuclear weapons." And then we also discussed a peaceful solution for Ukraine and coordinated our positions ahead of the NATO summit in Ankara. The US and Germany are strong partners in a strong NATO. Jan, break down this diplomatic language for us. What does a good phone call mean?
I mean, this is a beautiful example of scripted language, total language control. A good phone call is not an excellent or a superb phone call. You can see how Merz is trying to do a dual messaging on this one here. On the one hand, he wants to get across the message that this is still a constructive relationship, that they're talking, they're in touch, and they get along well. But at the same time, he also wants to distance himself from Trump. He never wants to let on that he might have had, too good of a time with Trump. That's the part that's reserved for the NATO Secretary General, Mr. Rutte. So he does both things here with these tweets, these messages, and I think this is very smartly done. He's ticking all of the boxes, the major agenda items, and there's enough room for him to distance himself from Trump with these messages. So I would say, this is exquisitely done in this case.
Would you say that this sounds like the political differences between the two have been ironed out?
No, I wouldn't say so at all. First of all, it's quite clear that some of these things that Merz listed in these tweets, are still under dispute. Obviously his criticism about the Iran war has not been removed. He says that we agree on some of the goals, but, certainly not about the methodology. So this was, ironing over, some of the difficulties there. No, I think this is the smartness of this message, that you focus on the constructive side of the relationship and don't put your focus on the things where you disagree. I think this is what was needed for him after these other comments that he's made. And he's done that, I think, quite successfully in this message.
As a political risk consultant, what would your advice be to Merz on how to handle Trump?
I think it's two things that directly come from the stuff that we've just talked about. First of all, your message control on diplomatic matters needs to be much stricter and tighter. And the second one is, just as I said a minute ago, focus on yourself. Don't focus on Trump. When you focus on Trump, you always do the debate on his terms. You have to jump over his sticks, as we say in Germany. You let yourself be guided by him who defines the debate. You don't want that. You want to focus on your own issues and own terminology. You have a foreign policy issue here ahead of the NATO summit. The good thing for Merz is that the one thing that really increases his standing vis-a-vis Trump is also the thing that makes him less dependent on him. And that is, this boost of defense spending, citing, as we call it, building up military capacity so that we rely less on the US. I think this is the great thing, that you actually have a strategy, push forward with this, and don't get distracted by the noise that Trump creates and that he uses also as a way of defining the debate for you.
Who stands to gain if this really were to be the beginning of the next chapter of the dispute between the German Chancellor and the American president?
I mean, we have with Mr. Putin in Moscow a player whose most important strategic desire is to separate the Europeans from the Americans, to basically open up that strategic European market in which the Americans are still kind of, the arbiter of last resort, the big protector. And the bigger the gulf between the Europeans and the Americans, the more bad blood there is between them and the less trust, the better for him. So, that's the key, the major benefactor sits in the Kremlin. China has similar goals. China also wishes to divide and rule in Europe. It does this more smartly and with more economic instruments. But also, again, there's a strategic opponent who wants to divide the Western world and wants to divide, what is seen as the League of Western States that are opposed to their goals, and the more you can drive a wedge between the two, the better. And I think this is the bigger scheme of things, and therefore these things look small and look quite silly when you look at them in terms of face value, but the strategic meaning behind all of this is actually quite big.
Jan Techau of the political risk consultancy Eurasia Group. Thanks so much, Jan.
Thank you very much.